right. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dr. Bethany Irons, director of the Kopenhaver Center at Stevens College. And I want to mention that this workshop is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube and our website, kopenhaver.stevens.edu. I would like to start off by thanking Florida International University's Kopenhaver Center and the director, Dr. Lillian Lodge Kopenhaver, for joining us. And as well as the Kopenhaver Satellite Centers at Rowan University and Marymount University for their continued partnership. So today we have two very special guests. So Dr. Rosanne Welch and Rashaan Dozier-Escalante for our panel, Writing is Activism, Creating for Inclusion on the Screen. So thank you both for joining us today. We're very happy to have you.
Thanks to be here.
So Dr. Rosanne Welch serves as Executive Director of Stevens College, MFA in TV and Screenwriting. Her television writing credits include Beverly Hills 90210, Picket Fences, ABC News Nightline, Touched by an Angel. Welch edited When Women Wrote Hollywood, which was named runner-up for the Susan Kopelman Award, honoring the best anthology, multi-authored or edited book in feminist studies by the Popular Culture Association. She also co-edited Women in American History, A Social, Political, and Cultural Encyclopedia, and wrote Why the Monkeys Matter, Teenagers, Television, and American Popular Culture. Welch has also published chapters in Torchwood Declassified, investigating mainstream cult television, and Doctor Who, New Dawn, essays on the Jodie Whittaker era. So Welch also serves as book reviews editor for Journal of Screenwriting and on the editorial board for Written By magazine. And in 2019, she was elected to the executive committee of the International Screenwriting Research Network for a 2-year term and is currently coordinating the SRN's international conference, which will be held right here at Stevens this fall. So welcome, Dr. Welch. Thanks so much for joining us. And then Rashaan Dozier-Escalante is a former U.S. Army reservist and senior physical security specialist analyst with top secret clearance from the federal government, a writer and director of documentaries, public service announcements, and training media for nonprofits and federal government. She's completed internships on HBO's Westworld, as well as Big Little Lies. In 2018, Rashaan and her pilot, McKenna's Callings, were chosen to participate in both the Producers Guild of America Diversity Program and the CBS Writing Mentorship Program. Currently, she is a story editor on the CBS drama series SEAL Team and a graduate of Stevens College MFA in TV and Screenwriting. Rashaan is a member of the Writers Guild of America and a director member of the Directors Guild of America. So welcome, Rashaan. Thanks for joining.
And she's a mentor for the MFA. Ooh.
And a mentor, yes. All right, so before we get into our discussion today, I did want to mention that the chat is open. Should you have any questions, feel free to type them in and we'll get to them either as I see them, or we'll get to them at the end should time allow. I will also open it up to questions outside of the chat as well at the end if we have a moment. So today's topic, really hence our workshop name, will be all about how we can write to support inclusion and diversity. And although, Dr. Welch and Rashaan both specialize in screenwriting and writing, for television, I feel that what we discuss today will be very applicable to most fields in communication, really. So yeah, let's dive in here. So my first question for you two, and I am going to pin you here. Okay, so we're all on the screen here. Okay, so it's pretty well known that, the entertainment industry has issues with underrepresentation and with misrepresentation, both in front of the camera and behind the scenes. We were just kind of talking about that. And we had talked a few weeks back about the importance of writers coming from the culture they're writing about. and really creating a world that is populated with reality in that way. Could you two talk about the implications when under or misrepresented groups are not involved in the telling of their own stories?
Rashaan, do you want to go first, or?
Oh, okay.
Go for it.
What I feel personally, in my own opinion, is that when the room is void of those types of voices that come from that type of background, whether it be cultural, racial, or religiously, or any other type of, space like such as that, it takes away from the authenticity of the story. And 25 years ago or 30 years ago, people weren't as interested in that. That wasn't the biggest deal for them. I hate to use this term because it's crazy now, but they weren't awakened to the benefits of being in a space where everyone is inclusive and those voices are included. But now they are. And they realize the value of that. They realize the value of writers being in a space where they're telling their own stories and are using their own experiences to say, this is what would naturally happen in this space. And I don't think that you can buy that experience. I think that literally it's something that comes from having lived it. And if you've lived it, you can speak it or give it to someone else in that space.
I agree with that completely, and have to say it's always so interesting. The word value is so important because the idea of stories is they help us understand each other. If this is about communication and screenwriting, and stories, for me, are the largest pulpit that you can find to spread a message. And the message ought to be about how we all work with each other and live in this world together. It's the Star Trek message, right? It shouldn't take another enemy to come to us till all the humanity decides we're all friends. We should already be there. And so that's what stories do. And we know that stories have that power. One of my favorite stories from a memoir is Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who said that when she was a kid, she watched Perry Mason, not the current one, but the one back in the 50s. And that's how she learned that even the job of lawyer and judge existed and that she could strive for that. Without seeing that on television, it wasn't in her world. So that the more that we can show on television of real stories of real people, you have no idea the effect we'll have. I mean, speaking of Star Trek, that's why Mae Jemison became an astronaut. She saw Nichelle Nichols on Star Trek and said, oh, that means I could be in that future. So the power of what we do on television, I think, is amazing. And the bigger and the more variety of stories we can tell, it's just the better the product. It just is ridiculous that we weren't that way, as Rashaan just said, 20 years ago or more. So, yes.
And it all kind of has to do with, too, who has a seat at the table to begin with, right? And so I think it was Dr. Welch, you had sent me an article about this, but it had stated on there, according to a recent report from the Writers Guild of America. So writers from underrepresented groups have made, some small gains in the past few years in terms of holding writing positions in both television and motion pictures. But so in 2019, men held 73% of writing positions, while women held only 27%. White writers held 80% of those jobs, while writers of color only held 20%. Writers with disabilities make up only 0.7% of currently active WGA members. So I guess my question to you two, what advice would you give to women, those with disabilities, people of color who are just starting out and are trying to navigate an industry that really, as this data would suggest, an industry that's really fraught with problematic hiring practices? What advice might you give?
I want to jump in that first and then pass it off, simply because I have been in the business longer than Rashaan. I'm older than her. And I was a secretary on TV shows when the men were being asked to hire at least one woman in each room. And the audacity of being forced to do that and having to watch the kinds of questions they asked at interviews and the decisions they were making about what type of woman they would let into their room. And then it's gone down the years of, okay, and now it's our turn to bring in someone of color. Oh no, we can't bring them into our sanctum of beauty or whatever this nonsense was. It's been very sad to watch. And I do know that we realize at this stage that the hardest The hardest choices fall on folks who are writers who are differently abled, because someone told me this and I never realized it. That is the one group to which we could all enter just because of a car accident. And perhaps psychologists say that that scares us. We don't want to be by people who we might become. Whereas obviously I'm trapped being a little Sicilian chick from Cleveland. That's who I will always be. So first of all, we have to address those issues, and we have to get people who are in charge to start recognizing that when they do hiring. And then we have to be pushy about that. And that's what the Writers Guild has tried to do in some areas, but we're arguing with ourselves because we do the hiring in TV shows. In terms of advice, I don't like when people say, well, it's about what's on the page. Of course it is. You have to be a good writer to get started, but it is also about support. And you can only look for so much support. It has to be provided to you as well. So I think everybody has to be aware if we really think we're going to make changes. That's my 2 cents. Rashaan, what are you thinking?
So in the last couple of years, we've had some horrible things happen here in the United States, and we've had some wonderful things happen as a result of those horrible things. And one of the things that happened in Hollywood was they were shamed. The people who had the hiring abilities were completely shamed because of the fact that, again, those numbers were referenced when it came to the number of ethnic bodies in rooms and the number of women in rooms. And people started to put their rooms on Twitter and Instagram. And so what you would see was, we have Black people in our room, or we have Hispanic people in our room. And there were a lot of rooms that didn't have any of those people. And they had like one woman in the room. And so that really shamed them. And so those numbers have gone up a little bit in regards to that. But it shouldn't take shaming to have somebody realize the fact that the reason they don't want people in their space is because they want to remain the same. They don't want to change. They want to come in and they want to still tell the racist jokes or the differently abled jokes or sexist jokes. And we want to say, we were just playing. It was just a joke. And there's a problem with that because a joke to you is an offense to me. And so people don't want to stop what they're doing. And that's a huge problem. So when you're talking to people about coming into this industry, it's one of those things where you have to tell them the truth, that you have to have a thick skin. I was told when I got there that I was a diversity hire. And Donald Glover just said that in 2009, when he got to Third Rock, that Tina Fey was like, listen, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, but you're a diversity hire because they hadn't hired anybody. But Tina Fey was the showrunner. She was the showrunner and the creator of that show. So tell me, why was there no person in the room that looked differently from her? So that was her issue. That was her fault. That was her issue to rectify. And she chose to rectify, but then she turned around and she told the guy to his face, but you're the diversity hire. And so when that happened to me, I said, you know what? I sure am. And one day I would love to live in a space where everyone has an opportunity to be the best writer that they can be and be employed as the best writer that they could be. And therefore, we won't need to have a diversity program in order to bring me in order to fill these seats. So when people come into this space, understand that people don't want to change. They just don't. And it's up to you to find the best way to enter this space, because they're not going to open the door. And that's still sad in 2023, but the numbers speak for themselves. The numbers with women speak for themselves, and the numbers with ethnic bodies in the room speak for themselves. So the only way that we can that we can appropriately change those numbers, I hate to say it, but we have to continue to shame the people who have the hiring ability.
I think that's true.
We have to let them know that these numbers exist. And if these numbers exist, let's take a look at what your room looks like. How many men do you have in your room as opposed to women? How many ethnic bodies do you have in your room as opposed to non-ethnic bodies? How many differently able people do you have in your room as opposed to able-bodied people? We have to keep shaming them so that they see that they have room to grow.
I'm going to build on that just briefly because I had a friend who went in for an interview and they liked her work, they liked her scripts, and then when they met her, she happened to be a woman of color. And their response was, "Oh, we already have our diversity hire." And it would have been great, she knew, if she could have said out loud, "But there are 5 white guys in this room, so you already have 5 of those. Could you, do you see the equivalency to this?" And of course she didn't, because she didn't want people to be upset with her. But that's exactly what people face very often, and it's ridiculous and stupid.
And it's all sort of a cycle too, right? So really who has a seat at this table then sort of leads back to who's being represented, how they're being represented, and then which leads back to viewer preferences, which dictate, what studios are willing to financially back and produce. What would you, in your experience as writers who work in the industry, in terms of network, studio, or production company responses to, say, the female gaze, or just writing for inclusion in general, what have you experienced in terms of, I'll put it like this, sort of the saleability of that, or network responses to those sort of initiatives?
Sean, me or you?
You can go.
All right, I'll say 2 things. There's a lovely gentleman, an ally in the world, a guy named Glenn Mazzara, who was on The Shield and did some other lovely work. He went straight to producers as a Writers Guild member, as a producer of television, and started going to them saying, "You have to think about this. This is important. This is where the business is, and this is where we should all be." And in his own rooms, he would ask agents, "Okay, I want 50% of what you send to me to come from people from these various backgrounds in this list." And they would still send him pretty much the status quo. And then he would have to fight back and say, "No, I asked for 50% of different new writers." And they would say they didn't have them, which we all know isn't true. They simply weren't representing them. So that forced them to do it. So it's just what Rashaan said. We have to keep essentially shaming people until they start making sure they represent people of all types. I think it's important for us to remember, and this is purely from a female perspective, when Coda won for Best Film a couple of years ago, right, 2 years ago, that is only the 3rd time in the history of the Academy Awards that a film focused on the life of a teenage girl won that award. Almost always what we consider quality films are the stories of men. And I love stories of men, okay? I'm Sicilian. I love The Godfather. I've seen a million. Okay, that's fine. But to think that Coda was the first time. The other 2, by the way, were Gigi, which tells us the story of a mistress being groomed for her older French man, and West Side Story, right, which is a brilliant classic and whatever. The earlier one, not the newest one. So to think that we don't even respect the stories of women as being artistically important, that just kind of tells you where the whole business is at and how much work it is to try to move in that direction. So I think that's, to me, something that is shocking when I tell people that. I'm like, oh, that's how much we still have to learn. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, taking a step back into what you said about Glenn Mazzara, Glenn is a showrunner, and he makes an effort to find what he wants. But the deal is that in making that effort, other people are going to have to open their brains as to where to search to get the people that they want. Like, for instance, right now there are several management companies out here that specialize in representing ethnic people. So if you want somebody on your staff, why not go to them? They've got a whole roster of ethnic people and women that you can read. But the people are relying, showrunners and producers and studio execs are relying on Gersh, CAA, WME to send them the status quo. And what they mostly get are white males, because those are the people that those agencies value.
Yep.
They value them. And those are the people that when you see the hot list, those are the people who are on the hot list. Like, seriously, like, it was like, there's a story of Avery DuVernay going to Sundance, and which Colin Terra, the guy who redid the Jurassic Park movies.
Right. Oh yeah.
Trevor, what? I'm so sorry, Colin Terran. I'm massacring his name.
I
Anyway,
can't think of his name.
yeah. So they both go to Sundance with their films, and his is this like quirky, like time jumping film or what have you, and hers is the movie where the young lady's
Mudbound.
in jail.
Not Mudbound. Which other?
No, no, that's
No.
the real.
Right. Oh, you're right.
Where her where with David Oyelowo, where the husband is in jail, and Lorraine Toussaint. And so it was a very moving film, like so moving. She walks out of there with people going, oh, patting her on the back, going, this is a nice movie. Yeah, this is great. Let's have a meeting, blah, blah, blah. He walks out of there with a mentor named Steven Spielberg.
Hmm.
And he ends up directing the next set of Jurassic Park movies off of this. So people have to open their brains as to who they're willing to mentor and who they're willing to accept into their circles in order to make the next generation of great writers, directors, producers. And if they don't do that, then we're going to end up with the same status quo that we've been getting, which are white males that are dominating the industry. And it's the saddest thing because there are so many people out there with so much talent. I mean, we saw what happened this past year with Woman King. I mean, even Gina Bythewood, Prince Bythewood, who has been in the business forever and given us such great movies, she can't get a leg up. Ava DuVernay couldn't get nominated for Selma, even though it was such a great movie. So it's all of these things that are pushing women into this little box that we've remained in for so very, 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 very long. And in an effort to get out, what you're finding is that people are putting their own money up and they're coming to the table with their own projects. And that's sad because nobody wants to use their own money. Nobody wants to put their house up. Nobody wants to, delve into their 401k for, to make a picture and then not have enough money to market the picture. So how do we move from that space where we're in this box and we're struggling to get funding and things of that nature to the big boy table where people see what we do as valuable, where people see our small, intimate projects that cost $750,000 to make on the same level as something else that's written by a guy that knows a guy and gets, Robert Rodriguez to mentor him, or Steven Spielberg to mentor him, or George Clooney to mentor him. Where are our mentors?
Well, that's the question. We have to get to those spaces to be able to be that powerful of a mentor, and it's taken a long, long time. I think that's really true. And you're describing exactly what Robert Townsend did more than 30 years ago in terms of just to get his movie out there, and it made his career, but it could very well have broken him, right? If it didn't go as well as it did, he had to take a huge risk. Whereas someone who's being funded by a major studio, you're not risking anything. So yeah. Money is so sadly at the bottom of all of this, and the status quo and power, because people don't want to lose their place on the food chain. And if they've always had a chance to get the best job and all those things, they're very scared of being displaced. So they're also not willing then to ally. So they have to realize it's not like the pie doesn't all go to one person. The pie can be split up, but people who've eaten all the pie themselves don't believe that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it didn't go as well for him because it took him multiple years and multiple credit cards. Like seriously, it took him years to make that film. People would leave and then come back and they take jobs and then they got a little famous in the meantime. And so they put a little money on the table. I mean, so it was just a lot. It took like 4 or 5 years for him to make that film. It was not the easiest project, but when he did, it was amazing because it belonged to him. But he still had
record.
Yeah, he still had to seek distribution. And the movie is called Hollywood Shuffle.
Yep, Hollywood Shuffle.
And it's still just as valid today as it was nearly 40 years ago when it was created by Robert Townsend. Hollywood Shuffle. I say, please watch the movie.
we took our MFA groups. It was given an anniversary run at a theater a couple of years ago when our last group that's graduating right now was coming through, and we went to see him in person do the Q&A. And exactly, he talked about the actors who came and went, and because how much money he had, he could only go every time. It was amazing to see the work that he did, that he had to do, as opposed to somebody else who sold one tiny short film at a festival and was then invited to direct some major motion picture by somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And yeah, so often, I mean, money and power synonymous. And you're exactly right, how it doesn't have to be an either or, right? And the pie can be split up. And I actually wanted to mention the Screenwriting Research Network conference, Dr. Welch, that you're doing, because that theme is gender and the female gaze, right? And so it's focused primarily on those female focused stories and research, and giving that platform for dedicated to that. And thinking about the female gaze and kind of what that means, it can be viewed from multiple viewpoints, right? So the perspectives or the choices of those like writing and directing the film, the viewpoint of the characters in the film, and then our own projection and our own preferences as viewers. But having a female writer and director can impact, again, how those characters are portrayed, and which can impact our perceptions as viewers. And yeah, what and who is represented is really, over time, it creates cultural understandings, right? Which can then lead to creating or upholding or even, dismantling stereotypes. Could you speak, and you kind of touched on it with that film too, but could you speak about the cultural influences of some, pivotal characters that were written by, female or male screenwriters?
Oh, goodness. Well, we could be here all day. So I'll pare it down to a couple, and I'm sure Rashaan has her own couple of favorites that she could bring up. Wow. For me, most people recognize the name Nora Ephron, but they tend to think about her in terms of the comedy she did later in her career. But for me, her first film was called Silkwood, and it starred Meryl Streep, and it was the true story of a woman in Oklahoma who worked at a nuclear power plant and discovered they were not being as safe with the material as they could, and so she became a whistleblower. And she was killed, or she died in a car accident. It was never solved. That film, to me, is an amazing film that I don't find on the lists of many other colleges. We have it because my program is all female focused. I prefer to see female writers and female focused stories, even written by men, because many of those have been very good if men have done their research. That's always an interesting thing to me. They don't think they need to research women. They think they know us, but they don't. And so in that case, it's Nora Ephron and Alice Arlen who wrote that film together. And I think that it makes the Meryl Streep character an incredibly three-dimensional woman. She's not perfect, but she realizes that she has an obligation to people, and she wants to fulfill that. And I love to see that. I think for me, and I'm going to make a real quick point here, that's a movie where she's not the perfect woman, but she's also not a hot mess. I'm a little tired of the Fleabag, you have to be a hot mess, but you can also go have a cool job, or maybe even Grey's Anatomy, which I generally like a lot. But in the beginning, Meredith was just such a pain in the butt. And I'm like, how did you get through med school? I don't think we need to see women that are totally useless and terrible in their own personal and sex life, let's say, but then they're brilliant surgeons. Like, can't I just see someone who's really a brilliant surgeon? For instance, when they did the movie on Ruth Bader Ginsburg's life, which is brilliant on the basis of sex, they had to talk to her daughter, who in life followed her mother and went to a fancy college and became a wonderful lawyer, and she teaches at some famous law school now. I can't think off the top of my head, but they needed drama, so they made her sort of a bothersome teenager. And I kept thinking, no, you know what, it's probably just as dramatic to think how hard it was to live in the footsteps of a woman as famous as your mother. There's drama there that they didn't mind because the world expected her to be a pain in the butt of a teenager. So I think it's really interesting how we portray women. And I want to see how difficult it is for women to achieve. That's drama for me. I don't need the hot mess thing. So Silkwood is a great example of a movie written by a woman who gives us a real three-dimensional woman to watch. Rashaan, what's yours?
Okay, I have a lot of women, but I'm going to take two, and then I'm going to give you a complete hot mess. All right, so Olivia Pope was great. She was a little bit of a, you know, a little bit trampy, but but she was really a great example for the television world to see that a story with an African-American woman at the head, being smart, intelligent, running things, and having a direct line to the seat of power was a really great opportunity. That character was viable, that woman was viable, and people would come to see her. Back in the day, for me, always at the top is Ellen Ripley, because she changed the way that people thought about a woman in that type of space. She was written by a man, which still is like crazy because she's such a three-dimensional character. Well, okay, the second one was written by a man, which opened the door more to her than the first one actually did.
True.
Okay. And that was really great because she became a powerful woman in a space where if you at the beginning of the movie, no one believed her. Like no one wanted to believe that this woman who had just gone through space and battled this alien was like, this guy, like, you don't want to mess with this guy. Like, don't go to that planet, you know? Okay, and the hot mess is the character from Homeland, played by Claire Danes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so having come from a certain world, this, you know, that woman would never have had a security clearance on anybody's life.
Exactly.
To make her interesting, you first had to give her this mental health issue, which was not the quote unquote bad thing about the show. The show was that this woman the problem was that this woman was so reckless that basically she wasn't a woman. She was a man who was doing all of these things with the most limited ability to be brought to the table in any type of responsible manner for the things that she was doing. Like literally, that's basically what she was, a man with a vagina, and not like in you know, like the trans sense or anything like that. She was just, it was like the woman was the character is written as a man, and it was like somebody said, well, can we make her a woman?
Yeah. Without
any of the in-depth things that would go along with that, the questions about any of that. Okay.
That's what I was saying. Exactly. That men don't research women's lives and women's real questions.
Exactly. And then she has a baby. And so she has a mental health issue. She has a baby and she's determined to get back in the field. And there was this like limited question about what do we do with this baby? So she gives the baby to her sister, and like, then it was, do I want to be a mother? And it really, it was, to me, there was no like in-depth question about really what was going on with her. Like how do you get to this space? And it was so disappointing because a lot of people don't know was that the hunt for bin Laden started after the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993. And it was a group of women in the CIA in the basement who hunted this man for years before 9/11 happened, begging people to believe that they knew of his existence. He was real and he was planning something big. I mean, they became obsessive to the point where they were called crazy. And then when 9/11 happened, they were blamed because they didn't find him.
Exactly.
So that's the world that we live in. And when you put that on screen, like, it's one of those things where, like, give me the life of those women sitting in that basement. I don't need to run around the world with that character from Homeland doing crazy things, being a hot mess, being irresponsible from the top of her head to the bottom of her feet, having not been brought to the table in order for a reckoning to happen in her life to make changes. Like, we have so many stories to tell, and I was disappointed by that one. So disappointed by that one.
Well, and you're speaking to also, we haven't even talked about the difference in jobs that people bring in when they're writers. You're bringing in this expertise about the military, and to see it so blatantly thrown away for the sake of what they thought was good drama, when there was so much other actual good drama they could have relied on.
Yeah, I mean, like, the fact that, like, Carrie, I think that was the name of the character,
Mm-hmm.
like, she had this her her mental health issues lent to this obsessive thing about finding this terrorist, which was absolutely great, but she didn't have to have a mental health issue in order to be obsessive about finding this villain, because those women in real life who sat in that basement for 7 years or however long it was before 9/11 happened, they were obsessive about finding bin Laden. They were obsessive to the point where they sacrificed their families. One woman had a baby, and like the next day, she was taking calls after having a C-section on where is bin Laden? You know, like, what is happening now? Like, what is he plotting? Where is he going? Like, it was crazy during that time. And people really, really, really need to know that these women exist, but you don't need to make them a hot mess in order to do it. I had a coworker who was talking to me one day, and she said, I've got this great CIA drama that I just turned in to my agent. And I was like, oh, really? Tell me about it. And she goes, well, it starts off in Iraq, and this lady's sitting at this bar, and this guy comes in, and they go off and they have sex. And then we realize, oh, it's the CIA operative who's like, a female, and da-da-da. And I was like, and how does that turn the story? How does that push the story along? Like, what does it do? Oh, like they have sex, but couldn't they have just had this really great attraction that we, could have played on for a little while without any of that happening? I mean, like, I'm the girl that used to sneak and stay up to watch Moonlighting, so I know what sexual tension is in writing. And so we have leaned into this hot mess female aspect of what we think is the best character for a female or the best writing for a female. And I don't agree with it. I think we can do better. We're in a new era. We can do better.
Oh, that's definitely true.
Thank you. Yeah, and I uploaded that WGA inclusion and equity report. Dr. Kogut had asked in the chat. And if any of you have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll get to them at the very end here. And another survey that I will actually link here as well, survey from the Center for the Study of Women in Television and Film at San Diego State University. It's very interesting how to look at this data and these statistics to see just how women really are portrayed throughout screenwriting. But okay, so it found that 80% of films featured more male than female characters. Only 7% of female characters were over the age of 60. Women characters were also more likely to reveal their marital status in the film compared to their male counterparts. And also in the study, women only accounted for 33% of protagonists in the top grossing movies of 2022. But in the films with at least one female director or writer, that number jumps from 33% to 56% with protagonists. So, it's about who has a seat at the table, but and it's of great importance to women, one, being written about in the first place, but two, being written about as, fully developed people, as characters beyond caricatures. But it's, really not just about landing the job, of course, but what practices would you suggest that writers and, creators in general employ to shift that data in a more inclusive direction once they've gotten that seat? So like, in other words, do you have any tips for, networking or daily practices or, how to navigate the industry standards that you feel might be helpful for people, especially those just starting out, to know?
I can go. Rashaan, you ready?
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I always say find your people, and I always say go to education. So if you can afford to take a class, you will meet people. and you will be able to network. And if you can get into any of the groups like Black Writers in Hollywood, or the military writing groups, if you're a part of the military, like in reserves or a veteran or something of that nature, I always say get into those types of groups because they offer networking opportunities that are really, 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 really great. And they offer a wonderful sense of home and support. And they are probably in a space where that you are, and they can relate. Like single moms, like I was a single mom in Hollywood, a very, very, very difficult thing to do, coming from a different background or what have you. And I folded in with other single moms. Like if you're part of an LGBTQ community, find your LGBTQ writers. You know, if you're a trans writer, find the trans writer, because we're looking for those voices right now. We are in support of those voices, and we need those voices right there, you know, right now. So finding those writing groups will give you a sense of support, will give you a sense of home, and it will always, always, always lead to the best opportunities, if you ask me, because those are the people that don't hog the information. So like, seriously, when you get into those groups, they're like, I heard somebody's hiring, or this person is leaving, they're getting bumped up to staff writer, and they need a PA, they need a writer's PA, and they need a new writer's assistant. I can put you in. And so when you get into that group, they give you information, and it's so supportive and so, so great.
Yeah, finding people who are, you know, willing to say your name in a room full of opportunities, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Dr. Welch.
Deeply important. Well, the word support, so important all the way around. You have to look for support, and again, if you have a position, you have to offer it. One of my favorite stories, I'm a huge Doctor Who fan, which is why I wrote a chapter about Jodie Whittaker and the first female Doctor Who, and I think she's brilliant, is Russell T Davies, who was the producer of Doctor Who for many years. And he created a spin-off called Torchwood, where it was about a female cop, and her husband was the stay-at-home husband. And she got into all the danger, and he was dealing with that perfectly fine. It was who they were. It wasn't some strange, weird thing in their world. And there's a great quote he gave. I had the chance to interview him once when he was here in LA, about the fact that he happens to be a gay man. And he thought, oh, well, the worst representation on TV is probably gay men, until he started to pay attention to how women were represented. And he felt so embarrassed by that. He thought, well, of course, I will always have gay characters in my work because that's my advocacy. But I now know I need to focus on making sure the women in the work I do aren't these crazy props where things happen to them and they are an object in which other events go on. They have to be fully and completely involved. And so a couple seasons after he left is when they actually came up with a female character for the Doctor. And in that case, a guy named Chris Chibnall produced it. And again, he made a commitment. He's a guy, but he said, look, I got given this platform. I'm going to make sure, one, that I take this big risk and make the character female. But it's not just her. There are so many other women, because the character meets people through history. And I met characters I had never read about. There was a female who was the first woman put in Germany in a parachute drop with a radio, so she could be, transmitting messages. I'd never heard of her, and here she was in an episode of Doctor Who. So I could now, let me study her, let me look her up on Wikipedia, let me see if there's any more books about her. And I'm a woman's historian in many ways, and had never heard of her. So he made a platform, and he stuck to his promise of adding to that. And that kind of support made people pay more attention. And the other piece of support is that if you want to support women and people of color and disabled writers, when movies come out about them and by them, you got to go see them in the first weekend, because the stupid town runs by how much did they make on opening. And if you say, I'll check that out in a few weeks, you're not voting to say with your money, this is a product I will support. So you need to get those friends together and go to the opening weekends. It can't just be Dungeons and Dragons that makes $75 million in a weekend. It has to be 80 for Brady if you want more product like that. So we can be supportive in lots of ways.
I love that idea of, that you're voting with your dollars, right? And you're supporting with your dollars. Absolutely. I wanted to actually open it up to our audience here today. anyone have any questions that they would like to ask our panelists?
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Cool. The microphone's up there, so I have to yell a little. So I am a writer with personal experience with like some of the most the scariest, mental health disorders, like the schizoaffective and the dissociative identity disorders. I feel like when I'm writing, I will never be allowed to write a schizophrenic character in a negative role because it's been done so often and so poorly before. Like, do you know what I'm talking about? Like, you're just not allowed to write a diverse character in a villainous role, even if, like, yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
I just left the room. I was on the Equalizer this past season as a co-producer, and one of the people in the room was gay, and they pointed out I can't write a gay villain because gay people have been villainized. The gay person is always the villain. And I thought about it. I said, my gosh, she's great. Like, and so she was like, I can't always write that person, as good, because then they become the hero in everything, and nobody wants to see the hero, with no faults or what have you. So she had this fine line that she was always writing when she was, in her own personal writing, where she had to write the gay character with faults that people can relate to, as opposed to just outright writing the gay person as a villain. And I learned that. I was like, okay, I see what she's saying. So I have the same problem as you, and like, if a person has a mental health issue, or the person is gay, or the person comes from a background where that was violent previously, like, am I allowed to write that they do violence? How would I do that? So I just solved the problem, because I feel like it is a problem, because it keeps us from writing well-rounded characters. Just write them with faults that people relate to, that can be villainous or can be considered to be something out of love. Like, we've all got a parent who will come in and tell you, baby, you shouldn't wear those jeans. They make you look bad. Now, is that parent being rude, or is that parent being helpful?
Protective.
That parent is like, don't move to New York, there's a lot of crime there. Is that parent being overly protective, or is that parent being realistic? So there's always that line and that question that can be asked if you're writing a neurodivergent character, or a character with mental health issues. Like, what is it that this character is doing that could be questionable, that either side can be taken, or people can justify either side?
I think that's very true. I'll second that. I'll say I tend to have tried to write characters who were paralyzed for some reason, because both my goddaughter and a good cousin of mine were paralyzed in car accidents. And so when I first was doing that, I'm talking 20 years ago now, people would balk at them having any problems, because they were supposed to be the perfect handicapped person. But the actors would come in and say, I'm tired of playing the savior. I want to play a three-dimensional. And at one point we did, in the writer's room, in conversation about who the killer would eventually be, it landed on, well, what if it's this guy? It will be interesting. Nobody will suspect him, blah, blah, blah. And that is what we ended up doing. And when the actor showed up, he said, oh, thank heavens, I get to have the meaty part and not the, look at me, I'm rah-rah saving the world and everyone loves me and I'm super jolly. So he wanted to see the full version of who he was in his life. And that's what the audience wants. They want to see themselves in all of the different stages of life and in all the different ways they should be. So the more people we have who can speak to that in a writer's room, the more opportunity we'll have to put those stories out there. We're seeing that with Indigenous people now, right? We're seeing that in different shows now that are offering that up to us. And suddenly we're like, oh, wow, there's a whole world we didn't know enough about. And when written by people from that world, we're getting the full story. So I would say you can write you will be given the chance to write a real story about someone with legitimate mental health issues that can be portrayed in a more realistic way than film has done before. Yeah, I would say now is the time that's going to be allowed to happen.
Thank you. And thanks for the question. Any other questions out there? I do see Deborah Farmer had put in the chat, check out the Black Screenwriters group on Facebook. Craig T. Williams is the administrator. It's great if you're interested in joining. And then Coverfly Career Lab networking group as well.
And I'll say that on Facebook, one of our MFA grads from our first year, she joined a Facebook page that was for Indigenous writers, because that's who she is. And it was something that Disney got a hold of. And they started to invite those folks in. They would pay them to have a trip in Los Angeles. It was only consulting, but it was a chance to network and, you know, meet with people and tell stories that you could hope would then be reflected in the programming on Disney. But it was through that Facebook page or group, if you will, that she got found. So I do think that those kinds of things are very useful. It's about getting to know as many people as possible and getting people to know who you are. And there are a lot of those consulting groups in Los Angeles that are trying to do a better job of making sure that their particular group, whatever it is being better represented. Although I will add, there's a flip side to that, which is there was an article, Rashaan, did you see it? It was in the paper, I don't know, a week or so ago, about how what we don't want to happen is that becomes a trap of, oh, we'll just hire a consultant who'll make sure we're not doing something wrong, as opposed to hiring a writer from that background who would make a whole lot more money if they wrote the piece versus if they just got the $500 for consulting on it. So again, you don't want to create it's so hard. Like you don't want to find a way to keep the writers out of the room by saying we're performing attention to them as opposed to actually offering it.
Okay. I have to find that article. Because that's a very, very, very good point.
I'll send you a link. I gotta find it.
That's an interesting thing as well, how, you know, social media and how we can, in a way, sort of take back some power in how we are being represented and trying to, you know, utilize that to network with others. Have you had any, you know, I know, Dr. Welch, you're pretty active on like LinkedIn or, you know, I think also Instagram possibly, but LinkedIn for sure. I see your videos on there all the time. I guess, you know, one last question here, really, do you have any advice for particularly our students who are really looking to get their name out there in a way that, you know, they may not otherwise be able to without something like social media?
I'm going to say, and I'm sure Rashaan will probably second this, that the town itself, Hollywood, the industry, is full of gatekeepers. But social media has opened up a place where there isn't a gatekeeper. Sometimes that's not great considering what can be out there. But there have been stories. There's a woman from Canada who I must remember her name and I always forget it. She started to write a Twitter where she would pretend she was on a show, one of the late night talk shows, and she would come up with the 2 or 3 jokes she thinks she would invent each day based on the news, and she would post them. And eventually either Jimmy Kimmel or Jimmy Fallon, I always forget which Jimmy, found her and linked to her website, which then got a bunch more people to follow it, and they eventually hired her to write on that show. And then she sold a movie, and it said she was a mother of 3 in Canada who was never going to move to Los Angeles. So that can't happen to everybody. But if you don't have material out in the world to be found, it can't be found at all. So what social media is offering, and TikTok, there are people who've been offered, you know, pieces of shows or things like that off having a TikTok thing. So I do think that there's some value to that, and there's an audience there that can build. So that's definitely opening a place where then an agent will come looking for you because they want the thing you're already providing. So I do think it's useful. Rashaan, what do you think?
So because I came into Hollywood in a different way than a lot of people, I always advise people to find the way that fits you. So if you're a mom and you've got 2 kids and you can't be in the writer's room, back in the day when I first came in, you know, people leaving the writer's room at 10 p.m. from, you know, coming in at 8:30 and leaving at 10 p.m. and things of that nature. You have to find out what works best for you. So for me, I kept a day job until I had room to breathe financially. And then I was able to work a series of internships that I had gotten through my military organization that I was a part of. 2 HBO internships, one Warner Brothers TNT TBS internship. And what that did was that introduced me to the gatekeepers. So I killed it at the internships, and the senior vice presidents took notice, and then they gave me references, and then I got picked up and I did this. And so, and then I did something else. And so it traveled by word of mouth that you should really talk to this young lady. She's, a really great worker and da-da-da-da. But by then I was over 35 and I had kids and I had bills and I had all the things that happen when you are, living life. And I was a single parent. So I don't tell people that this is the way to get into Hollywood, because if you talk to every single person that's ever come to Hollywood or worked in Hollywood, they don't have the same story about how they got in or how they got noticed or what have you. I say, write what matters to you. Write, I have to say it again, write what matters to you. Do not give us another speck of the boys or another quote unquote original pilot that mimics the boys or anything else that's out there popular. And this is the reason why, because I have to ask you, is that you? The things that have gotten me at this moment in time, I'm going on 150 meetings with two original pilots. And those original pilots spoke about what I wanted to talk about. One is called Paradise Valley, and it's set in 1952 in a true to life town of African Americans who ran their own town. They were upwardly mobile, and it was the jumping off point for a lot of the bands that then were hired by Motown and became, super famous or what have you. It was a resort town, kind of like Dirty Dancing, but from the African American aspect with upwardly mobile Black people. And it's based on a true to life town. And I optioned 2 books and I wrote it. And a lot of people were like, oh, well, this is popular at that time and that's popular at that time. And I was like, well, you go write that. You write that. And I'm going to write this thing that matters to me, because this is what I want people to know about the African American community. I wrote a pilot about a female group of spies. And the reason I wrote it was because the world that I was working in previously, the people didn't understand that Jane Bond existed because they were always focused on James Bond. And so I knew a couple of women that worked in that world, and I worked in the ancillary world of security. And I was like, these women are bad. They're big boss women, and nobody wants to pay attention to their story because we're focused on James Bond. So I wrote Jane Bond, and I've gotten a lot of meetings off of that because it came from the heart. So don't write, or don't write what people tell you should write. Write what you want to write and put the heart into it. And don't work the job that people tell you that you have to work. Find another way that suits you. Find another way that suits your family. Find another way that helps you stay sane in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm. That's the best advice ever. Have a life so that you can stay sane.
Well, that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Rashaan and Dr. Welch, for being with us today and sharing your time and your expertise. This was amazing. You two are amazing. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you.
Thanks for inviting us.
For inviting.
And if anyone has any questions as well, please feel free to send them my way. I'll put my email in the chat here, and I can share them as well with our panelists. But thank you all for joining us as well. And then I did want to mention one more time the Screenwriting Research Network, so Gender and the Female Gaze. So that's in Columbia, at Stevens College. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but September 20th to 23rd. Is that correct?
That is true. And I'm going to throw it in. I'll throw that in the chat as well. There's the website.
Great.
You can check out the website and join us.
Great. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a
Bye.
great weekend.